Welcome back, everybody. My name is Tucker, and today is another episode of the SL Show. There's a ton of stuff to cover today. Got a lot of really cool segments. First up being the big point about the Rockets Knicks last night. Then we've got a little bit of question and answer about Heat's Bucks, RJ Barrett's potential breakout, and then Dion Waiters versus J.R. Smith for the LA Lakers. Then we've also got by the numbers about Kristaps Porzingis potentially breaking out now for the Dallas Mavericks, and then some fun stuff at the end from the Twitter sphere, which I'll leave as a mystery, and then some potential Tua Tagovailoa to the Washington Redskins talk at the very end as well. But let's go ahead and hop into it. Okay, so let's start off with the big point here. The Houston Rockets lost last night to the New York Knicks, a team that is objectively one of the worst teams in the entire league. They lost in Madison Square Garden, 125-123. And this is kind of a confusing result for a lot of people, right? Because the Rockets have been playing extremely well lately. They'd won like 6 games in a row. Ever since the Clint Capella trade went down, they've looked like one of the best teams in the league and certainly one of the most dangerous and the biggest wild card across the league, potentially. Russell Westbrook has been playing outstanding. And as you look at their schedule, you probably just penciled this one in as an automatic win, despite the fact that it's on the road. It's the Knicks, right? Like the Houston Rockets should win this game 99 out of 100 times. Well, they lost it last night, and already there have been arguments made about, this is why you can't trust this Rockets team, and this is what's wrong with them. They're not actually this good. They're actually a fraud. When really, to me, this is just proving exactly what the Houston Rockets are. They are the most volatile team in the entire league, and that has everything to do with this lineup change where they're playing smaller, but also the fact that they rely on the three-point shot more than any other team in the entire league. So I don't necessarily look at this result from last night, although it's disappointing if you're someone like me that's starting to come around on this idea that they could potentially be like Western Conference Finals contenders. It is a disappointing result, but it doesn't necessarily change my opinion of them at all. They rely a ton on three-point shot makes. When they don't shoot the ball well from three, they're going to have some bad games like this, and they didn't have a very good defensive night. Guys like RJ Barrett, who we're going to talk about later, had a really nice game, and they just weren't able to keep guys out of the paint, and it was a tough night, right? But it doesn't show me anything different about this team. They are, like I said, the most volatile team in the entire league, because they could have a night like a couple years ago in the Western Conference Finals against the Golden State Warriors. They've got a chance to go to the finals, and they missed like 25 straight threes. Their play style plays towards that more than any other team in the league. It can happen to anybody, but it can happen most often to this Houston Rockets team. So I still think that they're very dangerous. I still think that they're one of the most intriguing teams around the entire league. Whether you enjoy watching them or not, I still think it's interesting to kind of pay attention and see stylistically what they're doing and how much different it is than what a lot of other teams are doing around the league. Teams will do what they do for 15 to 20 minutes a night on occasion, but the fact that the Rockets are playing this small for the entire game, the things that they're doing defensively where teams will try and get set up in the post and they'll trap the post and force turnovers and force rotations, it's all really, really interesting stuff. And I'm not any less intrigued or less interested or any less confident in this Rockets team just because they lost to the Knicks. Teams have bad games, right? Like it happens all the time. So I don't really understand the fact that people are using this as like a platform to stand on to say, look, this is why the Rockets aren't any good. I'm not saying that they're going to make the conference finals or the finals or anything like that. I'm still not there with this group, but this doesn't really change anything for me. And that's kind of my big point here. Moving on now to question and answer. Last night, the Miami Heat put together a convincing performance against the league-leading Milwaukee Bucks with a 105-89 victory. Giannis Antetokounmpo struggled with just 13 points, a season low, on 6 for 18 shooting, with Chris Middleton not being much help either, going 4 for 16 from the field for just 12 points. The Heat are now the only team in the NBA to win 2 games against the Bucks this year, and these two could possibly meet in the second round of the Eastern Conference playoffs. Should Bucks fans be worried that the Miami Heat have figured out the secret recipe for beating Milwaukee? Okay, so for me, the short answer here is no. I mean, this is only the 9th loss of the entire year for Milwaukee, so I don't think it's something that we should suddenly get up in arms about just because it's, the second time that the Heat have beat them this season. Teams are going to have bad nights, right? Like the Bucks played in Charlotte the night before. It's the second night of a back-to-back. They had an off night. The Heat played great. It was clearly a really important game for Miami. They were playing at home. They wanted to show that they measured up well against the team that has been, to this point, the best team in the entire league, and it hasn't been particularly close, right? Like this was a huge game for them, and the Bucks just had an off night. They had an off shooting night. They had an off defensive night. The Heat were outstanding defensively. The Bucks looked a little bit tired, like I said, coming in from Charlotte the night before. Makes complete sense that they lost this game. Now, having said that, are there some things from this particular game and this particular matchup that can be a bit concerning on a larger scale for this Bucks team? Absolutely. It looks like the Miami Heat have a really interesting combination of defenders to deal with Giannis Antetokounmpo and Chris Middleton and the other guys on this Bucks roster. You have Jimmy Butler, you have Bam Adebayo, who was fantastic last night. Those guys are going to be a tough matchup for the Bucks, and it makes sense matchup to matchup and defensively for this Heat team to give the Bucks some problems, right? And the other part of this is just the shot making. The Heat made a ton of shots last night, and in 7 of the Bucks' 9 losses this season, they've been outshot from three-point range. That's the recipe, as I've outlined in previous videos, in order to potentially upset this Bucks team in the postseason. They rely so much on the three-point shot, and they give up so many three-point shot attempts to the other team because of the way that their defense is set up, that is one way that they are susceptible. And if you outshoot them from 3 and you limit their advantage there that they typically have on any given night, they can definitely have some issues with any given team. And like I said, that's just the way that they play defense. They protect the rim first, they drop in pick and rolls, and if you can knock down shots like the Heat did last night, then you can give them some problems. Now, whether that's sustainable or not is absolutely debatable. I mean, Jay Crowder was out there hitting 5 or 6 threes. Like, I don't think that that's going to happen very often. But if you want to make a case against this Bucks team, it is that they are a little bit susceptible to being outshot from three-point range. Like I said, in 7 of the 9 games that they've lost this year, that's pretty much how they've lost. They've been outshot pretty significantly, even going back to that Christmas Day game against the 76ers when they made a season high like 20-something threes, right? But on the other hand, are teams really going to get that hot for an entire series? If they do, then the Bucks probably didn't have much of a chance regardless, and many teams don't if you're going to be playing a team that's going to be hitting between 15 and 20 threes every single game in a postseason series. So I wouldn't necessarily say that the Heat have figured out some secret recipe to defeating the Bucks, but I think more so this reveals on a more national level, on a more regarded level, that hey, there is a way to beat this Bucks team. If you can outshoot them, because that is one of their biggest advantages, then it's going to be a problem. Now, having said that, looking at the game itself, the Bucks played this like they have all of their regular season games. Giannis played like 33 minutes. Chris Middleton played like 29. They didn't play these guys playoff minutes. They're not going to push for some big win in Miami that's only their 9th loss of the year here at the beginning of March, right? Like, they're more focused on the postseason. They're going to rest their guys. They're not going to do anything out of the norm just to try and win one game in the beginning of March. And so maybe this game looks different if you're playing Giannis 38 minutes and Chris Middleton's playing more. The shooting stuff is concerning, but I don't necessarily think that it's anything that the Heat have suddenly figured out about this Bucks team that nobody else has. Having said that, as I mentioned earlier, the matchups are really interesting, and the Bam Adebayo against Giannis and the Jimmy Butler against Chris Middleton thing is fascinating to me, and I want to continue to see how that plays out in any other future matchups or potentially in the postseason, because this Heat team has generally been regarded as a team that's good but maybe not great and has overachieved in terms of its record to this point in the season. But in terms of a specific matchup with Milwaukee, they do maybe have some advantages over some of the other teams in terms of defensive matchups that make them at least intriguing, but I don't think they're necessarily their kryptonite or they've figured out some secret recipe. In a Knicks win last night over the Houston Rockets, RJ Barrett put up an efficient 27 points on 55% shooting from the field, including a huge layup on a drive late to help seal the game. Barrett is averaging 23 points per game in his last 2 games, both Knicks wins, and has put up 15 or more points in 6 of his last 7 games. Is he breaking out into a future star for the Knicks? So this is a complicated answer for me, because yes, he's looked better and he's looked more confident lately, and you'd love to see that, especially out of a young player that for some parts of the season has definitely struggled, and it's good to see his scoring totals go up. But there's so many other sides to this argument that you can kind of downplay the success that he's had recently, even as good as he's been. Because in the beginning of the season, he was getting like 30 plus minutes per game under David Fizdale. And since Mike Miller has taken over, his minutes have definitely dropped. And there's even some nights where he's not even playing starter level minutes. Now, to be fair, that's been one of the criticisms of Miller as coach, is he's playing the veterans too much and he's not giving the young guys enough run to develop. But it's still just interesting that this is a guy that potentially could be a future star, as the title indicates, but isn't someone that's getting even starter level minutes on some nights. And the other part of this is, I mean, someone has to score for this team with Marcus Morris no longer there, right? Like, they don't have a ton of scoring options, so a lot of that offensive responsibility is going to fall to RJ Barrett. Now, the nice thing is, generally, he's been pretty efficient on his bigger scoring nights, which is nice to see, and that he's not just chucking shots, and he's getting plenty of opportunities. And specifically last night against the Rockets, he looked fantastic. He was getting to the rim, he was hitting jump shots, he was really good, especially in the first half. Slowed down a little bit in the second half, but as I said, made a big play late. These are all encouraging signs for him, even in the face of plenty of things that you can kind of take away from a little bit. Now, if you want to go more on the positive side here, you could certainly make the case that he is building a foundation of a game that would work a lot better around players that fit better. More spacing. The spaces are very tight within this Knicks offense. Sometimes there's two bigs on the floor. Sometimes they do only have one, but it's someone like Julius Randle that's going to hang around the rim a lot. And once he's around players that space better and that are just simply better and he's in a better environment, maybe these skills will start to translate and he's starting to build that base, right? Of someone that can attack in ball screens, someone that can be a pretty good defender, has great athleticism, is a really strong guy, can get to his left hand pretty easily, getting to the rim, and is continuing to work on his jump shot. And I think there is a little bit of this thing where we're comparing him to Ja Morant and Zion Williamson, two rookies that have been incredible by rookie standards to this point in the season. And RJ Barrett has just had statistically an okay rookie season to this point. But it's definitely, it can't be a bad thing, right? That he is stepping up his game lately, especially from a scoring standpoint. He's looked better, and the eye test, especially last night, is a positive sign for RJ Barrett. And I'm still in wait and see mode in terms of the potential budding star for the Knicks, because I still struggle a little bit with his inefficiency as a whole throughout the season. But it's a tough situation to be in. I don't think there's any indication that someone like Ja Morant would fare any better from an efficiency standpoint with this Knicks roster compared to the way that RJ Barrett is performing. So still in wait and see mode on the budding star thing, but certainly positive signs for him to this point, even if there are plenty of things that you can use to kind of bring him down a little bit as well. After waiving Troy Daniels earlier in the week and opening up a roster spot, the LA Lakers have been holding workouts to bring in one more piece for their stretch run, with the big names at the moment being Dion Waiters and J.R. Smith, who both worked out for the team yesterday. Assuming they sign one of these two players, which one would you rather have, and would they actually make an impact? Okay, so this is an interesting question, and it largely comes down to preference. So it's pretty clear the difference in the games of these two players, right? J.R. Smith, for the longest time, has mostly, in an ideal scenario, been an off-ball player. When he's been on teams that have been successful, he's been someone that works off the ball, shoots a ton of shots, defends a little bit, and that's his role, right? Like, you might have to deal with a couple of crazy shots a game, but for the most part, this guy's a good three-point shooter, right? And Dion Waiters, on the other hand, can do some of those things. He can knock down some shots on the perimeter, but works, in comparison at least to Smith, works a little bit more on the ball, drives to the rim a little bit more, and works a little bit more in ball screens, right? So it just depends on your preference between these two players. So let's play this out a little bit. So the positives for Waiters are that he can kind of take up some of those Rajon Rondo minutes that on some nights just aren't very good, as a guy that can create when LeBron or Anthony Davis, whoever, isn't on the floor. Someone else that can do some things on the ball and pick and rolls potentially more efficiently than someone like Kyle Kuzma, right? Provides them another scorer that can create, that right now Rondo is kind of trying to be in some of their second units, and it hasn't really worked out all that well a lot of the time. While on the other hand, J.R. Smith is objectively a better off-ball shooter than Dion Waiters and can do some things defensively, but isn't going to provide really anything super efficient on the ball and pick and rolls like Waiters is. So it comes down to your preference, assuming these are the two players that it comes down to, and I think either of them at the end of the day will be more helpful to this team than Troy Daniels, who was waived to kind of open up this roster spot. Now, I'm not convinced that it's necessarily down to these two guys, but for me personally, I would probably rather have J.R. Smith, just because I feel like the need for extra shooting is a higher need than extra playmaking. Not that Dion Waiters can't shoot, but he provides more playmaking than he does shooting, while Smith provides more shooting than he does playmaking. And I just think that's a bigger need for this team, especially in the postseason. They're going to up their three-point attempts. They're going to play a little bit smaller with Anthony Davis. And I would rather have Smith, because I know LeBron's going to play more minutes, and then you can soak up, the 7 or 8 minutes a game that LeBron doesn't play with some Rajon Rondo playmaking, some Kyle Kuzma playmaking. You can kind of survive there. I'd rather have Smith for 20 to 25 minutes of good shooting rather than Waiters of, 10 minutes of being an on-ball player and 15 minutes of being an off-ball shooter, when that's just not something he's as good at. Now, at the end of the day, in terms of overall impact, I'm not sure that it's going to be really all that big of a deal. These guys might not even play that much. They might just be on the bench, even though this isn't a team with fantastic depth. But I think that this could, I at least appreciate the fact that they're trying to do everything they can to work along the margins. And if I had to guess, I would say at the end of the day, it's probably going to be JR just because of his relationship with LeBron. LeBron probably trusts him more than he does Dion Waiters just because of his experience with him in Cleveland. And I would probably pick Smith here in terms of who I'd rather have, as well as who I think would probably make more of an impact as a guy that could potentially hit a couple of threes in a playoff game and actually really help this team. But I do see the arguments for both. As we do in seemingly every single show, it seems like, let's talk about another player that is potentially breaking out. Kristaps Porzingis, since the All-Star break, has been fantastic. Up near 26 points per game, over 11 rebounds, shooting nearly 48% from the field and nearly 40% from three-point range in 5 games. And the question is this going to be the version of Kristaps Porzingis that they're going to get for the rest of the season? And if so, does that make them a dangerous potential Western Conference Finals sleeper team? So my first thought with this, as it is with most players that are quote unquote breaking out, is this sustainable? And this specific level of production, 25 and 12 on 40% shooting from 3, that's not sustainable. There's just no way that especially a guy like Porzingis that has struggled with durability in the past, there's no way that I'm trusting this small of a sample size against, there's 2 games in there against the Timberwolves. I'm not trusting that he's going to be this level of player, right? But I do like this. This is obviously a positive indicator of where he could potentially be going with his play, because before the All-Star break, he wasn't that efficient, looked uncomfortable, a guy obviously coming off of an injury. And maybe this is a sign that having that rest, having that break allowed him to kind of rejuvenate himself and is now going to be, like a 20-9 guy shooting 37-38% from three-point range. And if that's the version of Kristaps Porzingis that this team is getting, things become a lot more interesting moving forward now for Dallas. As Luka Doncic begins to get more healthy, as Porzingis begins to get more comfortable, this team is one that can definitely cause some matchup issues. And the first team that I think about here is potentially the Houston Rockets, because Porzingis is someone that can stay on the floor against those smaller lineups, in my opinion at least, against the Rockets. He's not going to be the quickest guy, but he can check somebody off the ball, he can protect the rim, and then offensively, he's going to be a huge issue, because it's not like this guy is a 6'10 center that, PJ Tucker can kind of bang around with. Kristaps Porzingis is a legit 7'2", 7'3", and he's going to be getting a ton of rebounds on the glass. He's going to be able to space the floor offensively as well, so it's not like they're losing out on spacing by having a traditional big on the floor against Houston. And as long as, he doesn't go in there and try and post up all the time, I think he could be a huge weapon and a huge issue in a potential series against Houston. Now, this is all assuming that he's going to sustain something similar to the level of production of, like I said, between 20 points, 9 rebounds, 38% from three-point range. These are all positive things, but you also have to consider we've never seen Porzingis or Doncic in a playoff game, not for a single minute. And it's going to be interesting to see how they handle that, how their games potentially adjust, how efficient Doncic can or cannot be in a playoff setting, because he does take on so much offensive responsibility for this team, and the durability of both of those players, with Doncic having multiple ankle injuries throughout this season and Porzingis never really being the most durable player. So these numbers that we're going by here are definitely encouraging, and I'm intrigued by this team as they're potentially creeping up the standings. They could even maybe snag the 4 seed before the season is over, which would make things even more interesting in the Western Conference. But if this is a team that's like a 6 or a 7 seed and they're playing Denver or Houston in the first round, that is a wildly interesting playoff matchup for me, made only more interesting by the fact that Kristaps Porzingis is really starting to put it together, it looks like. Okay, now let's move on to a section that's kind of fun. I'm not trying to call anybody out here, but this is it's a little fun for me, right? And it's called From the Twitter Sphere. And here's a tweet from Legend of Winning last night. Looks like my Miami Heat are about to come up with a huge win against the team with the best record in the NBA. And off of this game alone, Bam Adebayo should be the leading Defensive Player of the Year race. I'm assuming he means Defensive Player of the Year candidate. And it's just interesting because, and I've talked to Lo about this in the past, we've done a few podcasts together. His teams, when we talked, were the Lakers and the Hawks, and now suddenly he's claiming the Heat as well, which is fine. If you want to claim multiple teams, it's just funny to me that suddenly this guy has 4 different teams that he's now pulling for. But the Bam Adebayo Defensive Player of the Year thing is legit, right? He definitely should be a candidate. I think there are other guys to talk about, like Giannis, like Rudy Gobert. Bam Adebayo should definitely be up there. Those would kind of be my top 3 at the moment. And I don't really know who's going to end up winning it, but he's right. They should absolutely consider Adebayo as a potential candidate there. If you're weighing it out, I honestly, like, I probably would go with Giannis. I know that sounds crazy because typically this award goes to guys that aren't as good on the offensive end, quite simply. Like, normally the Defensive Player of the Year award, a lot of times at least, goes to a guy that's really good defensively, and he's so good defensively that it makes up for him not being as good offensively, aka Rudy Gobert or sometimes Draymond Green. At least his scores, right? Like, Draymond's a good passer, Bam's a good passer. But I think it's so impressive that Giannis is so good defensively while also having so much of an offensive burden as well. And I would like to see him win MVP as well as Defensive Player of the Year. But you can't really go wrong with Bam Adebayo as a candidate either. And it's just funny that Lowe suddenly has like 17 different teams. He can root for whoever he wants to. I don't care. I'm just messing with him. But just interesting that his Miami Heat suddenly now are, that's who he thinks is going to be his team and his Defensive Player of the Year winner. And last up now, let's talk about the Washington Redskins potentially drafting Tua Tagovailoa at number 2 overall, because there have been some reports over the last couple of days that just to make sure they're doing their homework, they did bring in Joe Burrow, unlikely, and Tua in for visits and workouts and interviews and things like that, just to see if, they potentially want to take a quarterback at number 2. And this is obviously significant because it's been pretty much assumed that 1 and 2 would be Joe Burrow and then Chase Young out of Ohio State. And this is obviously a team that drafted a quarterback last year. They've got Dwayne Haskins, but this is quickly shaping up to be a Josh Rosen in Arizona, Kyler Murray, Cliff Kingsbury type situation, because the Redskins have a new coach in Ron Rivera. He wasn't there when they picked Dwayne Haskins. He could have a different opinion of him than what Washington had an opinion on him last year, right? And I wouldn't necessarily be surprised if this is the move that they made, right? And they did the whole Kyler Murray thing where they trade away Dwayne Haskins for some kind of value, but I don't necessarily love that idea. One, because Chase Young is such an outstanding player that I feel like you have to take him if you already feel like you kind of have a quarterback. I feel like Chase Young is such a valuable player that he needs to be in Washington, right? And it just feels like you're not setting your franchise back a year, but it feels like you're just pushing everything off by one more year because you used such a high, like Dwayne Haskins was the 11th player picked in the entire draft last year, and now you're suddenly saying you're just going to trade him away. And Tua is really good. I'm not saying anything bad about him, but there's the health issues, and it feels like not necessarily a move backwards, but not necessarily a move forwards either. And it would make sense, like I said, new coaching staff, Ron Rivera wants to do his own thing, but for me personally, I would at least see what I have in Haskins. Unless you think Tua is some kind of generational quarterback prospect, I would pick the generational pass rusher in Chase Young and then figure out the quarterback thing later on. Because like I said, it feels like a step back, and who's really going to be trading for Dwayne Haskins? I mean, you're basically saying this guy's not good enough for us. We want to pick a different quarterback. I know it kind of worked out for the Cardinals. They got a second-round pick for Josh Rosen. I believe it was a second-round pick. But that's still a loss in value from a guy you picked near the top 10 to a second-round pick. And I'm not sure that the value would really even be that high for Dwayne Haskins, given how poorly Josh Rosen played in Miami. Obviously, it's Miami. They had plenty of issues there. But I'm not sure from a value standpoint it makes sense. I'd rather have Chase Young. I'd like to see what Dwayne Haskins is, and then you figure out the quarterback thing down the road. But I think that Young is just too good of a player. If this was a different draft class, then maybe you consider it more heavily. But for me, Tua needs to go to a different team. The Redskins need to pick Chase Young, and then we know what 1 and 2 is, and we'll kind of see how things fill out down the board. I've seen mock drafts where there's 4 quarterbacks picked in the top 6, and someone like Jordan Love, Justin Herbert, Tua, and then Joe Burrow, and all those guys are picked in the top 6, which would be crazy, and we're still kind of trying to figure out where each of these teams are in their draft process. But for me, I don't really think they're going to pass on him, and I would be surprised and honestly disappointed in the decision-making if the Redskins did decide to pass on Chase Young. And there you have it. That is going to be the end of today's SL show, and I thank you all very much for watching. As always, if you have other ideas you would like for me to cover, then leave those down in the comments section below. Like I said in the beginning, my name is Tucker. I thank you all very much for watching, and I will see you all next time.